Okay, finally time to get on and get the pistons fitted to the conrods and get the barrels on because the conundrum, as it were, over fitting these rings has been solved. Mainly thanks to friends, Lumberjack and David Drew and so on the Facebook, on internet and the various groups. Now there is actually a little sticker that comes with these, a little piece of paper, kind of like that, which shows which way up the rings go. Because I haven't fitted them because I didn't know which way up the rings were supposed to go, so there's no instructions. Now it turns out that should have been put in with the pistons, and for some reason it wasn't. I bought some pistons last year, and maybe the supplier thought, oh, he'll remember. Well, of course, fat chance of that. But I'll see if I can insert that little diagram that Lumber sent me into the video here, and it shows. And it shows from the manufacturer which way up they go. So basically, the top ring is flat, so that can go either way up. The second ring has got a groove in, the groove goes downwards. The third ring, the oil ring, has got like a double bevel on it because it's a double-edged ring and the bevels go upwards. So as we thought, but it's good to have confirmation. So then I'm going to put I've got the two pistons here. I've put the first set of rings on the first piston. And I like to boast that in all my years, I have never ever broken a piston ring. Not even when I was a stupid sort of rushing teenager or whatever. I have never ever broken a piston ring up until now. Yep. So I have just broken my first piston ring. I don't know. It's just, just not having a good week so far. How did I break the piston ring? I'll tell you how. I used my proprietary piston ring inserting tool, which is specifically designed for fitting piston rings without them breaking. Forget that one. As soon as I put that on, I think because it's an oil control ring, it fits in the groove, but obviously it can't go to the bottom of the groove because the ring was so thick. So it was already pretty half open. And so when I opened it even further to put it, as soon as I just opened it a touch to put on the snap, off it went. So fantastic. After that, I therefore just put the rings on as I normally do, using my fingernails, my thumbnails, and they've gone straight on. Well, I thought, stupid it, but let's do it properly. I'll use my proper piston ring fitting tool, piston ring pliers, and as soon as I put it in there, they snapped. Marvellous. So I'll have to get a new ring. Oh, hey. But there we go. These things are sent to try us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fit the second lot of piston rings to the second piston. We'll do that on camera. And then I can get them on the conrods and we can get the barrels fitted. And then I'll order the new set of rings for the third piston. And that can go on, obviously, after the barrels are in, which is what we're planning on doing. But hopefully we'll get the pistons on the conrods and then the barrels on. Right, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to put the camera on the tripod and we'll fit the rings without breaking them to the second piston. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. Got the piston. We're going to start off with the oil control ring. Our oil control ring is one that has a spring in the middle inside. So we're going to remove the spring. Just checking this is on camera. I think it is. And then the spring will be joined somewhere. There's the join. Okay, and it's got like a little a wire that runs. Oops, there it goes. Okay, so I'll just put the end of the wire back in there, and then I'm going to slip it on over the piston down to the third groove, and then close up the coil. And I'm going to put where the opening of the coil was, I'm going to put over the top of the gudgeon pin so I can remember where it was. Okay, can you see that? I think so. Because obviously once it's closed, it's impossible to see where that join is. But I want the join to be opposite the opening of the actual ring. So here's the oil control ring. In our case, it goes up. It's got a double. It's like it's got two like rings on it, two high bits, and there's a bevel on it, so which is hard to see. So I'm going to use the magnifying glass just to check. Yeah, and the bevel is that way. Just double check because my magnifying glass isn't great. Yeah, so I've got this bevel on the edge of the rings, and I want that uppermost. So I'm going to put the opening at the opposite side to where the hole is on that spring, using my fingernails and not the bloody tool. I'm just going to open the ring gently and then just minimum opening and lower it down till it sits squarely, which is not at the moment. There we go, over the spring. And I can now rotate this because as I rotate it, it rotates with the spring. And I'm just going to make sure it closes properly over the spring and it's all seated properly. Now, I'm sure these rings are pre-gapped, so you don't have to worry about gapping rings anymore. So that should be fine. Then we take the second ring, and that's got a little groove on one side, and I know that goes downwards. So again, you can get the piston fingernails, open it to a minimum, and then slide it down into the second groove. Checks all is well. Then I'm going to get the third ring, the top ring. Now the top ring, it doesn't matter which way up it goes because it's a flat ring with a flat edge. So I'm going to again put that on, open it with my fingernails, just slide it down and into the top groove. And then we're ready to put the piston on the conrod. Now, I might mention this again, but you've got the opening. For the piston rings. Now, what you don't want, you know, where the jaws are for each piston ring. So I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and get them all in a line. There they are. They're all in a line there. Can we see that? I think so. So I've got the actual opening. So what you generally do is you turn the rings. So the openings for each ring is about 120 degrees apart. So the openings are all in different places. Now it doesn't. So and for some engines you will have a specific. You have to check your manual. For a Trident manual, that's what we do. Trident engine. For some different engines, they'll actually specify where to put the gap. For instance, on my Kawasaki engine, you actually put the gaps, one at the front and one at the rear, so they're opposite each other, as I remember. But on this, we set the gaps so they're 120 degrees apart. But always bear in mind that when an engine's running, the piston rings will spin. So it's always good practice to set the rings 120 degrees apart. But never forget that the rings spin, and at some point those gaps, you know, with the openings will almost certainly align at some point. But it's always good to start off from there. Right, and then so we have two pistons with piston rings on, and we have a third piston which has no piston rings on because the piston rings are nearly broken. But never mind. We're now going to fit the. I'm now going to put the pistons onto the conrods. So I'm going to go off camera. I'm just going to cut the tape off, the protective tape I had on the conrods, ready to fit the pistons to the conrods. Right, we're ready to fit the first piston to the conrod. I'm going to fit the first piston to the timing side conrod. So I get my engine lube, and put that into the small end, and then I'm going to put some into either sort of flange or whatever you call it of the piston, and then of course I'm going to put some on the gudgeon pin. So I've got my lube, and what I've done is I've already fitted one of the gudgeon pin circlips is in the far groove on the piston, and so I'm going to now put the piston in place over the conrod. The main thing to note is that on a Trident, the inlet valve is bigger than the exhaust valve, and therefore the inlet exhaust valve cutaway on the piston is bigger than the exhaust valve cutaway. So you just always make sure that the inlet valve cutaway faces the inlet side. That's the back of the engine. Okay. And I think these will go on without being heated. So I've put a cloth over the mouth of the crankcase again, really to try and stop any errant gudgeon pin clip from disappearing down. Try and line these up as best I can. Introduce the gudgeon pin. There we go. That slides in really nice. Good. Yeah, and now I've got the gudgeon pin clip, which is like a G shape on it. Can you see that? Yeah. So now I'm going to check there's not a flat side. Sometimes these circuits have a flat, and the flat will then go to the gudgeon pin. What is that noise? Oh, for God's sake, it's a phone call. I'll have to take this. Well, that was an inopportune phone call. Right, where were we? I think I was talking about these gudgeon pin clips. If there's a flat, make sure the flat goes to the gudgeon pin. And check this. These are just round, and so it doesn't matter which way round they go. Get a pair of snipe nose pliers onto that sort of crossbar, and then this is a bit awkward, so it's probably going to go wrong. Introduce the far end, and then sort of like twist it to try and get the other end in. There we go. And then it's in, but it's not in the groove. So I get a little screwdriver and then just push it in. There we go. And we make absolutely 100,000,000% sure that that gudgeon pin clip is fully in the groove all the way around. And there we have the first piston in place on the conrod, and all I'm going to do now is then just repeat that very straightforward operation for the second conrod, obviously trying to protect that piston now from being caught on the crankcase studs and so on. Okay, so that's our next job. I'll just fit the second piston to the second conrod. Okay, so both the pistons are now fitted, and so we're ready to get the barrels on. So onto the barrels. Now, I took the barrels to the engineers, and they looked at them and they said, yeah, let's see if I can get some. There we go. They looked at them and they said, yeah, they need a rebore. We can't get away with the hone. Too scratched. It was the scratching that was the problem, which again would fit in with burning oil. So they've rebored them by 20 thou, and there you can see the nice cross hatch honing. That's the result of the rebore. Now, just while we're here, so let's talk about bedding in rings and things now. On these engines, on older engines, the rings need to bed in to get to stop oil getting past them and burning, so therefore creating blue smoke. So what needs to happen? It needs to happen is that these rings need to actually cut into the sides of the cylinder walls. So you don't want to use oil when you fit piston rings. and the pistons because that lubrication will stop. You actually do want these rings to be bashing the side of the walls and scraping them, because it scrapes them absolutely perfectly flat. Okay, and if you lubricate the barrels, the cylinder walls, then obviously the rings are just going to slide up and down rather than cut their way up and down the bores. So generally you fit them dry for that reason. Everything else obviously is heavily lubricated, but the rings and the cylinder bores you want dry, because you do actually want them to wear into each other. You're deliberately creating wear, because they cut into each other and therefore get smoother. And so again, that's why we would have a running in oil, which helps that to happen and prevents the rings from sliding too much. You put in a mega wonderful oil, it's only going to allow the rings to slide over the board, the cylinder walls, and therefore, it's just going to burn oil. You do want the rings to cut in to the board. So that's the first thing. So what I've done is, following the rebore, I have given them a very, very good clean on the cylinder walls, the bores, and because there's always a little bit left over from the boring and honing system process, and then I have just taken the smallest amount of running in oil and just wiped the bores with it, just the merest wipe, only to stop them going rusty, because it could be a long time before the engine is actually run. But I don't want to over lubricate for the reasons I've just said. Okay, leave them dry. Secondly, they looked at the engineers, checked how flat the top of the cylinders was, and cylinder block, and it wasn't flat. Number one, it was quite curved, so that wouldn't help leaking oil, because it's burning oil. It's also obviously leaking oil from the head as well. And it might, it possibly looks like it was leaking from the push rods, but it could have easily been leaking from the cylinder head gasket. And so they needed to skim the top of the barrels to get them flat. And they also noticed that the liners were recessed in the barrel. So that meant that when we put the gasket on, it wouldn't have clamped properly on the top of the liners, and therefore gas could escape and it could blow the gasket. So they're not proud and they're not in. The top of the liners is now perfectly in line with the top of the barrel, which I think is the best. You either want them slightly flush as they are now, or I think very slightly proud. Obviously too proud, and then the rest of the gasket won't seal. Now these small holes here, these are the 6 oil drain holes. So oil is in the cylinder head and it catches in the valve, around the valves, and it can't get out. So there's drillings that go through the cylinder head down, and these drillings carry on down through the barrels and then drain out back into the sump. And that's a known sort of leak point on the on a Trident, and so if these liners stick up too much, then you get a nice seal on the gasket, you get good compression, but then you could leak oil from these oil drain holes which come down from the head. So I think that's probably the best, is to have it flush as ours is now. I'll just mention while I remember as well that these little oil ways have little dowels that stick out that locate with the cylinder head. But over the years, I have found it's probably best to put the dowels into the head, lock them in the head first, which makes sense. So the oil is coming down through the dowels and then sort of into this hole, less chance of it leaking. Rather than if you've got the dowel here sticking up into the head, then it's easier for the oil to come down and leak round the side of the dowels. So it probably is better. That's why the dowels aren't in there, because I'm going to put the dowels into the cylinder head, and then they'll be in there when we put the head on. Okay, and also they decided that the tappets were okay, and I've now refitted the tappets, and I just gave them a light polish on the foot of each tappet using a very fine emery paper, and then obviously a good clean afterwards, because they reckon that the they were good enough to keep. We just got rid of any rough spots and so on. And lastly, working out which way round the barrels go. If you look, they're pretty, pretty symmetrical. It's easy to put them on the wrong way round, because the barrels will fit, I think, the wrong way round. So the easiest thing to note is these two central oil drains. Let's get this right. Yeah, they go on the timing side. Get this right. Yeah. So when you come to put the barrels on the crankcases, make sure those two holes are on the timing side. What I've done is I've actually put, with a mark, I put two F's on the bottom there to make sure I get it around the right way, because I think it would be. Would you be able to do it? Put it on the wrong way? I think you can put it on, possibly get it on the wrong way. It probably wouldn't go down. I don't know. It's because you've got two tappets on one side and one on the other, and of course you've got it the wrong way around, and it'd be the other way. But I think it'll probably still go on. Anyway, not advisable, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to put well seal on, and then put the gasket on, and then we'll get the piston ring clamps on, and then we'll try fitting the barrels. Not forgetting that we're going to fit the centre piston later, after the barrels are on from the top. Okay. Right, so I think we're ready to put the barrels on. Got well seal on the barrels, well seal on the top of the crankcase, which has now got the gasket on top, and I've fitted the very thin piston ring compressors, very thin, so that we can pull them out afterwards. They're thin and they are hinged, so that we can hopefully get them out from underneath the barrels, because the barrels are going to be very close to the crankcase. Once they're over the rings, there's hardly any room. So I've done up the piston ring clamps so that they still spin freely, but I know another quarter turn and they would be hard on the piston. So I want them so that they're clipping the rings right in, but they're not too tight. They're loose enough so that they will slide down the piston when I put the barrels on. Okay. Right. I'm hoping that we'll have a go, see what happens. I've never done it this way, but I'm looking at these, I'm thinking, how do they ever do this, trying to fit three at once? I mean, trying to fit the two at once looks impossible, because they're both at the top and there's hardly any gap at all between the piston ring and the top of the crankcases. And obviously we need to have the barrels right down over the rings before we can get rid of the piston ring compressors, but no, we'll be fine. Right, so I'm going to put some more lube on the camshaft lobes, and I'll put them on the feet of the tappets. And there's no oil on the pistons or on the bores, but we'll have a go and see if we can get those, see if we can get the barrels down. Here we go. Okay, so let's try and put the barrels on. I've put an adjustable adjustable spanner on the crankshaft, so I can turn it and also try and hold it to stop it spinning. So I don't want one piston coming up and the one going down. Okay, let's have a look. I think everything's how we want it. Let's hope it is. Get the barrels. Make sure the F that I put on is to the front. There we go. And then just there we go. They're on top of the pistons. And then I'm just going to gently tap them down. Let's check there. Just check that the rings haven't popped out of the compressor. That's happened before. You know, the bottom ring comes out. You don't realise you're pushing down, and you'll snap that bottom ring, that oil ring. Yeah, we're going down nicely, both sides. Oh, I just remembered a problem, but I think we're okay. No, I think we're okay. What it is, the hinge, I don't know if you can see it from distance, but there's a little hinge on the piston ring clamp, and I don't know if that hinge will clear the side of the crankcase. No, not sure. And I'm not sure if it doesn't clear, if we're down, I think we're down low enough anyway, you know, if it doesn't clear. Right, things aren't generally going to plan for me today at all, because I just finished putting the barrels on, came to check the camera, and the camera had turned itself off halfway through the video, and I didn't realise, but I run out of space, I ran out of memory, and so it just shut down, unbeknown to me. And so all the second half of fitting the barrels, which of course was brilliant, isn't on there. So all I can do is to talk you through what I did. It's just very annoying. So yeah, I just knocked the barrels down till I was sure that the barrels were over the top of the rings, which is basically just so that they were covering the top of the gudgeon pin. And then I loosened the clamp on the rings, compressors, opened the compressors, and then because they're hinged, I was just able to pull them out, and then I've tapped the barrels down to where they are now. That's all brief, but it went on pretty well. Would I do this again, putting the barrels on, and then I'm going to put the center piston on later? Yes, because it was hard enough doing it, you know, like that, just with the two. I think to myself, how on earth did I ever do it with three now? So, but of course I haven't tried putting the center piston in yet, so we'll wait for that. Yeah, so what I've done now is I've knocked the barrels down, taken the piston ring clamps are out, knocked the barrels down to just so that the studs are poking through. Now I haven't put it all the way down, well, for two reasons really. I've got the original nuts, cylinder base nuts and washers, but obviously they're pretty dirty, pretty manky, and they don't cost much, so I'm going to replace them, and I forgot to order them because they're only small things, but obviously we've got a beautifully clean engine and so on, and so it just seems a waste to put, you know, those dirty nuts on, because just, you know, they make a big difference. They look nice, the new nuts. So A, I'm not doing it for that reason, but B, also if you push the barrels down too far, then there's no room to get the nuts on between the top of the stud and the bottom of the first fin. So you wouldn't want to push them down anyway. So what we'll do is I'll order new nuts and washers, so special washers that go under these nuts. Then we'll put them in place, tap the barrels down a bit, just get the nuts to start biting on the studs, and then, you know, then push it fully home as we do the nuts up. Because if I pushed it down all the way now, I'd only have to take it back up again, you know, to get the nuts in over the studs. The well seal, there's well seal on there. Now that won't be affected. The fact that it's not being mated together now, that's fine, because the well seal stays liquid forever. So it's not like Hylamar or whatever that's going to set and go off. That's absolutely fine, just leaving it like that, and then, you know, it can stay there as long as it wants. Okay, right. So a bit annoying that I ran out of room on the camera, but there we go. So I'm pleased the barrels are at least in place. I need to order new piston rings and new nuts and washers for the cylinder base, and then I'll finish off putting the barrels on. And then and then when we get the piston on, I can put the sump plates on, and then I can mount the engine back on the engine stand, and then we ready to do the rest of the engine. So that's very good. Okie coke. Barrels on for now.